And now, right to your hosts of Down the Garden Path, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing.
Hello and welcome to Down the Garden Path, where each week we discuss down-to-earth tips and advice while doing our best to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. I'm Joanne Shaw, owner of Down2Earth Landscape Design, and with me is my co-host and co-author, Matthew Dressing.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Matthew Dressing, owner of Natural Affinity Garden Design. As landscape designers and gardeners, we believe it's important and possible to have great gardens, which are sustainable and low maintenance, and we want to help you make it happen.
That's right. So welcome to our show tonight. We are talking about terrariums. They are a fun and easy project you can do to add a dynamic living ecosystem to your indoor plant collection. Do you already have a terrarium? Tell us about it. Write us at downthegardenpathpodcast@hotmail.com. And don't forget to stick around for the end of the show for our new Stepping Stone segment, where we will answer more listener questions and give you timely tips for your gardens and landscapes.
That is right. Terrariums, terrariums, terrariums.
I know. And it's almost like artwork. So everybody's not just having a house plant, right? It's like
No.
artwork. It depending if you've got a really cool, interesting container, it could be a really nice piece of artwork in a room. Makes a great gift, I think. Even
And
a great activity for March break coming up.
I was just going to say, yeah, the great activity just to kind of do with the kids and get them into plants or,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah, like you said, it definitely I like the idea of artwork, right? Because it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to just be an enclosed structure with a thing. You can get as fancy or as simple
Yes.
as you can, right? It can be just a stone and
Mm-hmm.
some plants. I've seen people where they take things like train decorations. You build like little villages around like model trains and
Right.
incorporate people and scale, and so
Yeah,
it can be elaborate or just simple and
that's right.
enjoyable.
I think even the fairy garden stuff, like it would almost look
Yeah.
cuter in something like that than because in outside, I always kind of found that like they get kind of lost outside. So I think you could really have fun with that. So we can talk about the different kind of containers, right? There's open container or a closed container. Do they have to be glass?
They usually are glass. They don't have to be glass. They could be plastic or
Hmm.
plexiglass or something like that. But glass is definitely the easiest to visually see through to look at the plants and get the most
Right.
out of them, out of
Yeah.
that view.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
makes
So
sense.
you can definitely use something like an old vase or you could have a large mason jar. I think of
Hmm.
like a very big one that
Yeah.
has maybe
Those
you'd have.
old olive or pickle jars, right? Those big ones
That's
that I'm sure
exactly what
like
I was
all
saying.
our grandparents have, or all our parents have somewhere that they've got nails in it or something like that, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I know. I know. Or you can go to like Home Sense and find like a really interesting glass. They've got a lot of lidded, like something that's very maybe much more, or even Value Village, to be honest, like a used store. For listeners who don't know who Valley Village is, but like
Yeah,
Goodwill, that kind of thing where you can reuse something that has, it's glass and there might be like an interesting, more ornate kind of shape, but sometimes they have like a candy dish, even like they have a lid.
yeah.
Or not. You don't have to have a lid. So there's kind of like an open terrarium and a closed terrarium. And I was showing you that I had made one. I had this covered vase and it's quite large. Should measure it. That I just did not know what to do with for years. And I literally had it filled with corks from our wine. Like that was like where when we finished wine, that's where the corks went. So it was kind of a waste. So we did a little dining room renovation and I made a terrarium. And now this large vase sits on top of the hutch and it just really looks nice, I think. Yeah, so I was excited that we were going to talk about it too because I just made one.
And you just made one. Yes, and it
That's
looked
right.
beautiful. I
Hmm.
remember you sending me the pictures. So
Yeah,
that
so I'll
was
put those pictures on our Facebook group for anybody who wants to go take a listen. I did do some videos and stuff, but yeah, so it's a good place to go have a peek at what I accomplished there.
What is a terrarium? Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you haven't built a terrarium or you don't know about terrariums, a terrarium is basically a closed or open, like Joanne was saying, ecosystem, a grouping of plants that we arrange decoratively. And the idea is that it's somewhat self sustaining or minimal inputs. And it kind of creates just that point of visual interest. So you said there are closed terrariums and then
Mhm.
there are open terrariums. So closed terrariums, I think, like you were saying, it has a lid. Open terrariums can be almost anything as far as a terrarium. So it can be a glass jar. Again, usually something that we can see through. We can see the layers
Mhm.
of soil, little details within the jar, but it is open to allow air circulation and gases to escape and things like that.
Mhm. Like a fishbowl would be a great, like an
That's
open one. Think of like a fishbowl or some of those vases that, again, they're kind of an odd shape. But
yeah,
yeah, they're like a half bowl. Because I think having an opening is good, but it doesn't have to be like a fish tank where it's the whole thing is open at the top, right? Sometimes it's just like a smaller opening contain compared to the container.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, it can just be, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're popular because they need less watering, less love. Like they're kind of like a little rainforest. Aren't we kind of creating a little rainforest?
Yeah, yeah, like you said, there's
Hmm.
that kind of closed ecosystem. It's
Yeah.
got its own moisture, it's got its own everything all kind of trapped inside. So
Hmm.
reducing the watering and yeah. And as you pick your container or jar, Joanne, you had a pretty good sized one for sure. It can be a very small something. So if you have a very small space, it can be just, two or three small plants, closed or open ecosystem, or you could get even larger. You could have, a small aquarium size
Right.
terrarium that you can grow in as well. So it really kind of comes down to how much time and effort you want to put
Hmm.
into it or how elaborate you
Yeah.
want to make it because they can really be various sizes. It's up to you, really.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
think the cool thing is that sometimes people have, like me, have something unique laying around the house and they don't know what to do with it. And this is a great, right? Because I'm trying to think of what are those other little glass houses that lid it, like the lid. I can't think of the name. It'll come to you. Do you know what I
It will
mean?
come to me. I always picture
I know.
yeah, like those glass, almost like English terrariums, where it's
Yeah.
like the panes of glass. Is that what you're
Yes,
thinking?
panes of glass, and it's like a little roof, and like one side of the roof flaps open and stuff. Something like that. Or like I said, a fit like, you maybe you haven't had a pet fish for years, but you've kept that fish bowl just cause, or so I feel like that's the cool thing about a terrarium is that you don't necessarily have to go out and get a container. I bet most of us have like a cool, unique, again, whether it's large or small, like I said, the mason jar or something that where you have something that's like, okay, this is kind of cool. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I'm going to keep it hanging around.
Yes, agreed. And I think
Yeah.
as plant people, we all have a handful of
Yes.
like,
Plants
pots
people.
and jars and
Yeah. Things
things
like
to
that.
do
Yeah,
for
for
sure.
sure. So what else do we need for a terrarium?
Well, we've got our container or we've picked our jar. We know it's going to be sealed or unsealed. But like all of our other plants in our pots, we're going to have to pick some soil or some sort of medium or potting mix to plant them in. So there's a few different things that you can do. Obviously, we're planting live plants. So we're going to have some sort of soilless media we need. So it can be just something simple like your classic potting mix that you pick up at your local garden center. But again, depending on the plants that you choose, which we'll get into shortly, we may choose a different growing media, or we might amend that media. If we need something with a higher moisture retentiveness, we might add a little bit more organic matter in there. Or if we need a little bit of extra drainage, we might add a little bit of sand or perlite or something to it to that effect.
Right.
Usually we'll see as well the soilless media again, like what plants we choose. So if we're going to choose cactuses and things, probably going to do an open terrarium versus a closed terrarium. So I mean, the plant type itself will choose that soil
Yes.
as well.
Yeah. And probably more of a sand base than a soil base.
Right, yeah, something very much like an African violet soil or a
Mhm.
cactus soil with a little
Mhm.
bit of that organic matter mixed in there too.
Mhm.
One of the things that a lot of people talk about with our terrariums is activated charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's charcoal that's treated under extremely high pressure. I believe they also, I think it's an oxygen starved environment. I think there's a process as well where they use some oxygen to increase the porosity. So activated charcoal is basically just charcoal that has a lot more porous structure to it. What it will do is it will help bind toxins and molds and funguses and act
Mm-hmm.
as a breeding places for beneficial bacteria and other things within the soil. So I see one of our first questions here is from Edward.
Mm-hmm.
Edward writes in, "Hi, Matt and Joanne. Maybe this is a silly question, but here goes. Do terrariums smell? Good or bad? Thank you for your answer." So they should just kind of smell like, earthy, nice,
Mm-hmm.
moist potting soil, some kind of green, and a little bit of moisture in the air. I kind of think of like a spring day where it's just a
Right.
nice
Yes. Or after it's
earthy.
rained or something, right?
Yeah, that petrichor, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, Edward, you can get, and that's a good smell, but you can get some bad smells. So, like we said, it's kind of that rainforest or closed ecosystem. So, as our terrariums evolve and grow, our plants are living things. They're going to drop some leaves. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to release gases. They are going to have some things breaking down. Some organic matter, depending on what's in your terrarium, will start to be acted on and break down and release some things. But you also have water that you're going to be adding as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
charcoal is generally added in there to help with that smell.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, and it kind of it'll
Getting to that.
trap.
Sorry, that's what I was gonna say. I thought that was what the charcoal, one of the things the charcoal
Yeah,
was for. So yes.
right. So bonding those weird smells, those weird gases,
Mm-hmm.
those methanes, but also toxins. So chlorine or fluorides in our tap water is a toxin to our terrarium environment. So it'll help bond on some of those sites. Again, remember, like a charcoal is super, super, a piece of charcoal, if you picture it, it's just a small stone, but then all the pores that are within that stone, it opens up to the size of a
Mm-hmm.
small office space kind of thing per thing. So there's lots of space to trap all those toxins and smells and other weird things, for sure.
Okay.
So charcoal is one of those things.
Mm-hmm. And you don't need a lot of it, right? Like I did, or we'll talk about how we build it, right? We'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll talk about how we build it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Is it one of those necessary components though, as that we need? Like we need soil. There are a lot of benefits to the charcoal. So
Mm-hmm.
generally, yes. But we do have to keep in mind, much like the activated charcoal we use in aquariums, eventually all those pore spaces will be filled and then it is useless. So it does have a shelf life. Um, aquariums usually month and a half, you're going to change out your charcoal filter if you have charcoal in your filter because you have such a volume of water passing through it and it's a lot
Right.
more bioactive than a terrarium. So it'll last much longer than your month and a half, maybe
Mm-hmm.
6 to 8 months or more.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't last forever, is where I'm going with that.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. So eventually it will stop working.
Okay. But I think it is an important part. And especially for like our listener Ed, like if you're concerned about a smell in a closed, well, even a closed one that you have to take the lid off, right? Or an open one. That's one of the things that the activated charcoal helps with. And it tends to be the one thing that you might have to run out and get. Like a lot of these things you might already have. If you're a gardener, if you have house plants, you might already have the soil and the rocks and the moss and even the plants maybe, right? But it's usually nobody's got like activated charcoal laying around. You've got to go to and you usually have to ask because they actually are in small bags. So I know I like walked up and down the aisles and looked everywhere I thought it would be, and I finally had to ask, and it was like in a bin underneath the table the orchids were in, on kind of thing. It wasn't super because I think it's a really specific thing.
Yeah, they'll have, like you said, like the orchids, right? They'll have it
Yeah.
with some orchids, and they don't have overly large bags of it. Or even if they do, sometimes it is just another one of those growing medias, and it may not necessarily be activated charcoal as well.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So if you do need just a little bit, again, I think of always the aquarium store, your local aquarium store.
Oh, I never even thought of
Um,
that, to be honest.
yeah, because they're
Uh,
using it in their filters, so you can usually
yeah.
know that it's activated from there. And they might be a little pricier versus a garden center
Yeah.
or online, but they usually will have some for their filter
Mm-hmm.
material there. Yeah. So
Okay.
activated charcoal, fun and necessity to help keep the toxins and the gases away for sure.
That's right. That's right. Now you mentioned, can we just go back to soil for a second? I think you mentioned soilless. Can it be potting soil too?
You
Okay.
could,
That's what I
yes, but
used. Because that's
y-
what I used.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
Usually you just have, our normal soil. So soil versus soilless. Soilless just means there's no sand, silt, or clay as part
Okay.
of it, right?
Okay.
So, but usually the sand and the silt and the clay are heavier. They clump together. It's not
Mm-hmm.
as porous or as light. And
Right.
the tropical plants have in further in the south have a different soil than we do here in the north or our normal growing soil.
Right.
So
Okay.
kind of like our house plants, it's a little heavier. It might slow them down. They might adapt.
Yeah.
But yeah, soilless is usually again, and it's lightweight, so you can put it on a
Okay.
shelf. You have all those extra added ones.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. I don't know why. I guess I just visualize soilless, and I don't know if our listeners agree too, like looking a little different. But yes. Okay.
yeah. Like
Yeah.
our regular potting mix is generally soilless.
Yes. Okay.
However, like we were saying before, we might have some sand in there to add some spaces, or some perlite. Usually is bigger
Right.
than sand, but does the same thing. So
Okay.
yeah, we might not be true soilless because there's sand in there, but it's just that kind of lighter mix. And that soilless medium might be just your regular potting mix, but I mean, you could use things like, rock wool and other mediums, like
Yeah.
clay balls, things like
Yeah.
that.
And that's kind of why they have so many different, you can't just go to a store anymore and buy potting soil, especially a garden center or a plant store. They've got like the African violets soil, and they've got the succulent soil or the cactus soil, and then they've got the seed starting soil. But really you're kind of like, okay, what is the difference, right? And sometimes I think it's all the same soil, just in different bags. But you're right that there would be, let's say, more sand in the succulent and cactus soil, and something else more in the oh my goodness.
In the like the normal potting mix, or yeah, they're all gonna have like different or the African violet soil. Yeah, I might
I
still
don't know.
have some organic matter, but
African
yeah.
violet soil. That's boom, the African violet went right out of my head. So yeah.
So yeah.
Oh goodness.
The
So
other
so
thing
yeah.
a lot of people do to add to our soil or our growing media is they add some stones to the bottom of the thing. And that is generally more of a decorative consideration than a necessary consideration. So we have this myth where we add gravel to the bottom of a house plant because then it helps it drain. And we have that capillary rise, that water that's held against gravity in the finer particulates of the soil. So that it won't move from such a large porous space to from a small porous space unless you really flood it. And at that point, we're kind of in trouble. So basically, just if you're going to add some gravel, know it's more decorative than it is drainage, because that finer particles in the soilless mix will still hold that moisture. And all you're really doing is making that soilless mix more shallow, and you're rising that saturation zone. So if you think of your normal house plants, right, that bottom couple of inches always stay moist. That's that capillary rise, that water held against gravity. If you put
Hmm.
stones underneath it, it just raises it closer to the crown or the roots of the plant. So add that little bit of extra soil, but choosing your right soil and having your charcoal maybe there instead of your decorative soil is a better idea. Or you could again, you could do both. You could have
Hmm.
a nice cool band of a cool colored gravel or bonsai soil just to add together another aesthetic layer to it.
That's right.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to the lid situation too, in
Yes.
that you can create. So if you have an interesting container and you want it to be closed, but it doesn't have a lid, then you can do, like, sometimes you can get one of those, like a cork, like find like a cork trivet or a cork,
Yeah.
and you can make that into a lid. And I saw this at one of our garden club meetings. She actually used saran wrap,
Yeah.
and she just, put it on really tight on the top of the jar, and like overlapped it a little bit, and then literally took like an X-Acto knife very carefully, so it didn't look messy. It looked it was like amazing actually how neat it looked. Like you had to really look at it twice. Really, and she just said this is just, a simple way to kind of do that. So that's something that just came to me, and I just found that picture, and so I want to let our listeners know, because sometimes maybe the lid is broken or chipped or something, and
Mm.
you want to still be able to use it. So I think you can kind of think outside the box as far as lids go.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great idea. Yeah, you're right. As you say that, you see those big cork trivets or like toppers that
Yeah.
are stoppers. Yeah,
Coasters, like, you know what I mean? Like,
coasters.
depending on the
Yeah,
side of the jar, the size, or because you can even use an X-Acto knife to cut, like, even if you had a square trivet, cork trivet, you could probably cut that to be the size you need it to be for your, because I mean, it has to have a kind of a tight fit, but doesn't have to be like super, like, because even my glass one, like, it's not like sealed like the saran wrap would be sealed, right? It's still loose.
yes, yeah. You can seal them,
Yes.
and like permanently seal them. But yeah, generally we always have a little bit of loose. There's a little bit of gas exchange, and
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
especially in one that's maybe not as biodynamic. Because CO2 is still a nutrient that
Right.
plants need, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
As you were saying about, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I was gonna say we've got some great listener questions. So,
Yeah, so that's where I was
uh,
gonna jump with Lenny.
yeah, okay, good.
Yeah,
Um,
Lenny's written in High Garden Path. I had to write again tonight. What a topic. I was just taking my 11-year-old daughter to do this. Can we use an old fishbowl? It is glass. Any tips on what to do with it? So yeah, Lenny, you can definitely do
yeah.
it if you. And I was thinking about the fishbowl and then the lid. Was
Mhm.
if you wanted to do it closed, you could make that cool decorative lid to fit your terrarium. If you wanted to do a closed one, or if you
Mhm.
wanted to do an open terrarium, you could do that as well. But a fishbowl is, like you said earlier, a great idea to
That's right.
do.
And
And
we're just gonna go over, you asking about the tips, and we're just gonna go over all those tips. So just stay tuned, Lenny, and
yes,
we will explain to you. They're very easy, and I hope your daughter can listen too, because they're pretty easy. But yeah, I think it's a great idea for, especially for March break coming up. So
yeah.
so
Well, and I
yeah.
thought of too her daughter doing, if you were to make your own lid, you could paint your lid or draw on it, or
Mhm.
make it more decorative as well. Paint
Mhm.
butterflies on it, or it could also be an art project unto itself.
That's right, and I've seen one where they used 3 fish bowls and they stacked them. So then that meant, like,
Oh,
the bottom 2 had a lid because it was the one on top, and then so if you really and so I think that's cool because it doesn't take up that much more space, right? It's just kind of, a vertical space, and, and you could have, experiment with different plants and have, let's say, the sand. So the one I saw, that the open one had more of the sand and rock and succulents, and then the other 2 were covered. So, yeah.
ooh,
I know, because
very
my
cool.
son has a fishbowl one, that I made many moons ago at a garden club meeting, and he took it over, and I've said, "We can get more and we can stack it," and he just looked at me. He's like, "No, this is like one." He's keeping the 2 plants that are alive in it alive, and he's happy with that. So yeah,
This
so
is good
that's good.
enough, mom.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So Monica has asked us a great question as well. So hello again to my favorite gardening show. The leaves are touching the glass in my terrarium. Oh, we're so excited that you have a terrarium. And they are starting to turn a brown color. Any ideas what to do? Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, this is maybe where, if it is openable again, Monica, maybe, or Monique, sorry, if we have it closed, if you can open it, might just be again a matter of just going in and doing a little bit of maintenance. You can just prune off that leaf. It's touched the side, and there's moisture that's trapped in between the glass and the leaf. So the leaf isn't exchanging gas; it's staying wet, and it's starting to rot, and other things are
So
taking over.
just snip it off, right?
Basically, just snipping it off and removing it so it doesn't break down and encourage more, release ethylene and do all that kind of stuff within the terrarium. And it should be okay. You could wipe that area just in case there is a little bit of fuzz or some botrytis or some mold there. Just a little Q-tip and some rubbing alcohol, and just kind of rub the glass gently, or and disinfect it and wipe it off. If as best you can, basically.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, Monique, how big your terrarium is or isn't. So that might be harder or not harder to do. So
Yeah.
yeah, getting our brown leaves and things falling, dying flowers, little pieces that don't quite make it, that's going to be a natural progression for our terrarium. And
Okay.
that's kind of where some of that little bit of maintenance comes in where we might remove it.
But like the dying flowers, you can leave, right? They're just going to drop.
They're going to
Or do you
drop,
want to
right?
help them drop? Like, because I know we'll get to plants shortly, but I did put one of the mini orchids in mine. So I wondered
Yes.
about that. I'm like, I wonder what's going to happen when those, but I'll cross that bridge. But
Well, and yeah, and that'll come down to like how biodynamic your terrarium is,
mhm.
because I think traditionally we just kind of, potting mix, some charcoal, some gravel, and we leave it, and there's nothing really living in there, right? Because our soilless mix are generally treated so they don't have weed seeds and pests
Oh, okay.
and diseases in them. So we're missing that microbial life that break things down. So you
Mm.
can add um, different things like springtails and arthropods and millipedes to make it very much more biodynamic.
Yeah,
So
Dylan asked me about that. Yeah, his is definitely broken down. Like his is, to be honest, his is gross. But he's fine with it. But he just thinks it's still kind of cool. And he did ask about, did I put any? What did you call them? The little spring
the
tails?
little springtails, yeah.
Yes, and I said no, I didn't. But I said, like, I don't know. Do we, like, when we find a spider in the house, are we supposed to put that in, or you know what I mean, that kind of thing? So yeah, that,
Yeah.
well, we can do a deeper dive on that as well. But yeah. So Monica, I know we had Monique, and now we have Monica. Very good coincidence. But
Yeah.
Pat. So Monica's asking about pets. Hello to Joe and Matt. My cat gets into everything. Are these safe for cats if she eats it? I'd say that, a lidded one would be the best option there, right? Because that's
Yeah.
perfect, Monica.
Yeah, the cats aren't going to be able to break into the lid unless you kind of leave it open, in which case they
Hmm.
probably will smell it and then they'll try to investigate it.
Yeah.
They might investigate it again, but then again, coming down to like, are the placement? Is it out where the cats can get it? Is it at a window where it's a highlighted one, or is it a low light plant one? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
My
but if it's
experience with
sealed
cats
and
is the cats will get there, like jump up
right,
and
so
stuff.
if
But I
it's
think if it's
lidded,
sealed with a good lid, or even like the big mason jars, Monica,
right.
where we can barely get into them, as
Yeah, they won't smell it and be attracted to it and
Yes.
get
Hmm.
into it. And then but if you do use an open one, then yeah, you just want to make sure that if they do get into everything, those plants aren't toxic if they decide to,
Hmm.
paw one out and start eating it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but it could be a good way if you struggle with being able to have plants around the house, because of the cats, and then a terrarium might be the answer. Like, you really could have fun with that.
Hmm. Yeah,
So I hope you give it a try and let us know.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
So Hank is written in too, and he says, "Hello again to Joanne and Matt. I'm thinking of turning my old aquarium with a light hood into a terrarium and putting it in my living room with no windows nearby. Our old aquarium's good for this purpose. How much light do I need for proper growth, and would the light hood work? Thanks."
Yeah, you could definitely use your old aquarium with a light hood. So the light hood, I would assume it's like with the aquarium where they have that full spectrum light, or the with the reds and blues, to do with the aquarium, penetrate through the water and get those plants are at the bottom. So you could definitely do that as well, and then again seal it or close it, or have it as more of an open terrarium type thing. And then you're going to be able to, Hank, have much bigger plants, different size plants. You
Hmm.
might be able to add a pet or propagate some stuff, which you're moving into like a vivarium where you have other things, other uses beyond just kind of a closed ecosystem. So, but yeah, you could definitely do that. And the hood, the lighted hood that came or you bought for the old aquarium should work as well. Because again, you're usually full spectrum because the plants need that light in the water as well as above
Hmm.
the ground. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Again, how
think
much will? Oh, go ahead.
I think that's a big advantage of that, Hank, is that you can have bigger plants, because that
Yes.
is the restriction, right? And I know I was sharing my little video where in my mind's eye that container I had was very big, and the plants I bought were going to fit, and then in reality, not so much. So I literally had to go back to the store and buy smaller plants. So I think you have the advantage there of really being able to mix it up and like have like understory, like you can make your own little, I'm almost jealous now, can make your own little like rainforest in the sense, right? You can have like the low
Yeah.
understory plants and a couple of the bigger plants, and you could definitely have fun with it. So please, if you do something, we'd love to have a picture, or you can post it in our Facebook group. That would be great.
That's right. As we hit the bottom of the hour, just a quick thank you for joining us here live on Reality Radio 101. I'm Matthew Dressing here with my co host and co author, Joanne Shaw, and you're listening to Down the Garden Path. Joanne and I enjoy hosting Down the Garden Path each week, bringing you interesting and relevant topics to help you achieve a great garden. Like tonight, we're talking all about terrariums and creating and caring for terrariums, a great project for those of you who might have kids or grandkids or nieces and nephews like me who have a March break and are looking for a project. Every episode, we learn right along with you from our research and from the guests that join us here on the show. Like Joanna said, don't forget to spend more time with us down the garden path. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Down the Garden Path Podcast is our handle there. As well as, I'm sure we'll talk more about it at the end of the show as well, at Down the Garden Path Podcast is also our handle there. You can find past episodes and current episodes on YouTube as well as support the podcast on Patreon. So, yeah, you can find lots of your favorite podcast episodes of Down the Garden Path on all of the major podcast provider. While you're there, hit that subscribe button to be notified of content. Don't forget to like, share, and leave us a comment. We love hearing from you. And tonight is just, we've got lots of amazing questions. So thank you, everybody, because you can always write us here at Down the Garden Path Podcast at hotmail.com. Don't forget to check out our websites as well. You can find Joanne at www.down2earth.ca and myself at www.naturalaffinity.ca. So yeah, there are lots of plants that you can be using, and again, it's the size comes down to what size terrarium you end up having.
That's right. That's right. And Francis wrote in and they said that it's a very interesting. Good luck. So that's great. And Wayne is asking about a moss terrarium. Hi, Garden Path Show. Are there any benefits to a moss terrarium? Thank you.
Mosses are wonderful to grow, and that is like a whole subject by
Is
themselves.
that its own show?
That could almost be its own show, but mosses are easy because you have like sheet mosses that just kind of grow and take over. You can get things like your frosty fern, which is kind of like a club moss that you can grow as a terrestrialized plant, or you could use kind of like your bunch moss, where you can grab little clumps of moss that you see outside. And there's lots of different types that you can buy online, whether you're in the States or Canada or anywhere in the world. Usually an Etsy shop has some different mosses for you to pick up in different color. There's like pink sphagnum mosses. So they're great. They enjoy humidity. They add some surface area, another place to exchange gases, and just kind of very much more aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
They will eat nutrients. They're not changing the soil or producing extra oxygen or CO2 or anything like that as far as benefiting the moss terrarium, but they're just super decorative, and you can create
Yeah.
so many interesting miniature scenes like rolling hills of Scotland, or beautiful bonsai kind of aesthetic
Mm-hmm.
as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's where I thought of like with the fairy gardens, or you
Oh, fairy
mentioned like the
garden,
little
exactly.
Lego, like, and stuff. But I do feel
Lego.
like moss is definitely like can be an understory plant in the terrarium as well, right?
Right, so you don't have to have exposed soil or, stone on the soil. Just a little bit of sheet moss or club moss or
Mm-hmm.
bunch moss just poking around, and you can rip it into little pieces and set it into little crevices and crack cavities. So really can make a nice understory or ground cover plant, really, and then
Mm-hmm.
accentuate the other colors and textures of the bigger plants around it, for sure. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
thank you very much, Wayne, for your question.
Yeah.
Kelly writes in, interesting show tonight, Garden Path. Should we hang our terrariums? Thank you. And yeah, you could
Yeah.
definitely hang it, Kelly. I quickly, my mind jumps to like a macrame
Me
hanger,
too.
right,
Yeah.
with a
Macrame hanger.
big fish bowl that there is in there, or a cool mason jar to create an interesting shape. You
Mm-hmm.
could definitely hang your terrariums. Just remember, we're going to have some added weight from the charcoal and the glass, and a little bit more volume of soil. So just make sure whatever you do hang it on, that the hook, as well as your ceiling or your wall, whatever you're hanging it off of, can actually support that, because that
Okay.
would be most unfortunate if it fell and broke.
Yes, yes. And there's some neat, so even if you don't like the idea of macrame, but there are some cool, I looked on Pinterest and they show you how to hang, like create just more of a simple hanger for with string or rope, or to make for your container. So that's something to check out. So why don't we talk about this? I know we have some more questions, but why don't we, because I think everybody's dying to know the steps, Matt. So what do we, let's say, well, pretty much they're almost the same, right? For the closed and the open.
Yeah.
Yes. So
And
what is the first thing we put in the jar or container?
yeah, it's pretty simple. We are going to start with our decorative gravel if we're going to do our decorative gravel, or we're going to go right into things like our charcoal. So we can put that right in the bottom. I have seen, though, people mix charcoal into their soil. So it doesn't have to necessarily just be a layer of charcoal. You can mix in your charcoal to your soil, kind of a two-part soil to two parts charcoal, mix that all together and place that in the bottom as well. So if you do
Okay.
want to do a decorative layer, start with your bottom layer that is decorative or visual, or again that layer of charcoal, and then we're going to put our topsoil or our soil as a mix, our next growing media in there next. I have seen some terrariums where they have taller containers, again where
Mhm.
they can decoratively layer, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right, so you have a very tall fluted, you might have like 8 inches of layered sand and charcoal, and just as a
Yeah.
very like visual component to it as well.
Yeah,
Um,
and you can even do the, like, even the size of the rocks. Like, you, if you were
right,
doing, let's say, the larger shiny rocks, and then you do the smaller rocks, and like you can kind of definitely, because you can make the emphasis even beyond that too. Like you
yep,
said, if it's a really tall container, you can really make that look interesting by the layers before you even get to the plants. So yeah, and I think some of it is what type of plants you're going to put in too. If it is going to be succulents, and maybe there's sand and then rock, and that type of thing. So yeah, but it's definitely a layered approach, and I did that with mine. I did do the rocks, and then I did layer the charcoal, and then I did do the soil.
yeah, yeah, like you said, the soil is, as we get to the soil part, it depends on, then are you having an open terrarium or a closed terrarium to a point. You can have open and closed terrariums with just a regular soilless mix, but it
Hmm.
comes down to the plants. So more of our vegetative, our leafy tropicals, they will tolerate that high humidity tropical kind of environment of a closed terrarium better than things like our succulents and our cacti. They like it a little bit more air circulation, a little drier. They don't need that high level of moisture, so you get a little bit of ease there. So, but again, you could have a leafy one that is open, or
Hmm.
you could have a leafy one that is closed. You don't want to have a succulent one or cacti one that is
Closed.
closed, because they won't tolerate that humidity, and molds and mildews and rot will take over quicker,
That's
and
right.
ultimately knock them out. Yeah.
Yes. So then after I did my soilless mix, and then kind of laid out my plants, and that was harder than I thought it was. It really was. And I think the key there too is to make sure, let's say you're using 3, and that's, even though I thought my container could hold more or bigger ones, I ended up with 3. But I think the key is to make the look at the leaves and the foliage. So when you're picking plants, check out the foliage, that all 3 are slightly different.
Yeah.
So I went with like a taller peperomia that is
Mm.
a little taller, kind of like more like succulent leaves. And I went with a tiny fern, and I went with my mini orchid that I already owned, because I was like, okay, I didn't pick up the right thing. And so, I didn't want them touching the glass yet. So I felt like that was kind of a nice little mix. So yeah, so I think that's something to pay attention to. And then I did some sphagnum moss on top of that, like to
Right.
just cover up the soil.
Yeah, kind of like a
And
mulch layer.
yeah, and then I did add, no, sorry, I broke up because the pot was too big of I can't think of the moss now, but I ended up splitting the pot and
Okay.
putting it on 2 sides, and which is something you can do. You can be rougher with those plant roots than you think, but just added almost like it's like the turf, or at the base of the plant. So I mixed in the sphagnum, and then I also had, because it was also a different shade of green. So recommendations: make sure you're mixing up the foliage texture as well as color. Like some were dark green, some were, a bit more of the yellow, that type of thing. I think that makes for a successful and interesting container.
Agreed. Much like our landscape, right? When we're designing
Mm.
outside, we're gonna have foliage, textures, shapes, form, colors. Exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
no, that's excellent. I was trying to think of that little moss. I was trying to remember your terrarium and
I know. Me
um
too.
the little moss, but I think I forget what it is.
Yes, that's okay. I think I kept the tags, but yeah, but again, I'll have pictures in on our Facebook group. And I think you can have fun. There's some plants like the pink polka dot plant. I always look at that plant. It looks so odd and so tender, right? But it apparently does great in closed terrariums. So I'm like, I'm just noticing that now on the list. Oh, look at you. What is that? Is that it? No, that's
Yeah,
the shamrock. Or is that the shamrock?
no,
No, it's
yeah,
oh,
that's
that's
my
so good.
big polka dot plant. It's like a 2 by 2 shrub naturally.
Yes.
So I've let it grow, but yeah, they make a wonderful terrarium plant.
Yeah.
So does the nerve plant with the colored venation in it. And they stay nice and low and smaller leaves. And if left to grow, like I just showed Joanne mine,
Yeah.
it can get
Get
very
very
big, but
big.
they make a
Yeah.
wonderful plant.
And the peperomias, am I saying it right? Peperomias.
Yeah,
They are very lots of variety there, and I think it's kind of a name that will stick with you because I don't know about you, I think about a pepperoni pizza, but
that's
anyway,
exactly what I
it's
think
not
of.
exactly the same word, but it's close. So if you go to a garden center or nursery, they come in variegated. They come in burgundy. They come in like like almost reminded me of the caramel heuchera in
Yeah,
that kind of a caramel color. They come with spots and dots on them. They're very interesting. So you could almost just get three of those, and they would
yeah.
be three different ones that would work really well. And yeah, they're just in like a 3 or 4 inch pot, not even. So if you didn't want to do a fern, or I mean, and certainly at the store, you could get some help if you wanted to get some help because there's so many plants. I know we can't. We'd have to do a whole other hour to tell you about all the different plants,
Oh,
but
yeah.
just keep in mind that things that look like a bit more rainforesty are better, like the ferns and the peperomias and the other things that have a lid, more fragile, and things that like a succulent or a cacti that is a bit more, you would need to water it a lot, would be better in an open container.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, so many different amazing plants. And remember too, you can have your plants in your terrarium that are highlight plants. So you've got a very bright indirect light or window, or maybe you have a space that is in a little bit of a lower light. You can still do a terrarium there as well. Again, like your nerve plant, peperomias will take a little bit of a lower light. Your frosted ferns, things like your
Okay.
philodendrons or your jewel orchids. So there's a good way, there's a good, highlight and low light
Right. Right.
type terrariums you can have. So if you don't have light, you're still in the game.
So string of pearls and something like that, like there's the whole variety of the string of pearls family. That would be
Yeah.
more of a succulent, right? That you would do.
That's a little bit more of a succulent. Some of the strings
Okay.
of pearls I have seen, string of turtles, string of pearls, string of
Yeah.
dolphins, creeping fig, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They will work, but they are a little bit more succulent. So just watching that watering and that
Okay.
humidity level in there before they go.
Okay.
But they're a little bit more versatile than like just a strict cactus or like
Right.
a
Right.
true succulent.
And how would you handle trailing plants though? Like, would you, that just requires more maintenance where you're kind of going in there and kind of guiding them?
Yeah, so you might end up having to guide them, or if, like again, like the creeping fig or string of pearls, as they kind of root as they go, you might just kind of go and as they root, cut them into little clips or
Hmm.
little segments and cause them to break. So breaking meaning they take over themselves and they grow new stems or stimulated to grow new stems and kind of like make little groupings. So yeah, you could prune them. That might be a little bit more of the maintenance. Or again, if maybe that's kind of what you want as your ground cover, it's just a bunch of little heart-shaped leaves. Maybe you just let them take over
Mm.
and do things in there as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but that
Okay.
might be if you don't like it like that, it is more of a maintenance thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sharon wrote in and she's asking if whoops, somebody just moved. She's thinking of starting a terrarium, and our kits are there kits that are sold in stores good to start from? I thought there would be some kits, but I could not find some. So I think it's but
Yeah.
part of me feels like it could be, and maybe Amazon, as much as I hate to recommend that, but I think part of the fun of the terrarium, though, is Sharon is the hunt of finding like the perfect container, and then the plants, and like I said, if you have gravel around the house and soil, already, like often you've got lots of that stuff, or
Yeah.
somebody who does, and you can borrow a scoop because you don't need a ton of soil, right? You can just
No,
it's
you
really
like
just, yeah,
cups at most.
yeah,
Yeah,
you can just
usually.
have to look for probably the activated charcoal. So yeah, so for me, it's the hunt that made it fun. But if there is a kit, I definitely would love to know, right?
You know who used to have a kit was Fafard.
Ah,
So they had like a terrarium kit, and it was just like a little sealed 10-liter bag. I don't know if they still have it. I haven't seen it. Um, or maybe the garden centers around me just don't carry it anymore. But yeah, it had a little bit of sphagnum moss, a little bit of your potting mix, and I think a little bit of soil or sorry, stone and charcoal in there as well. And it was just little 4 little pouches, so you kind of had like a basic start for just a small just an average sized tabletop kind of thing. So I'd have to look to see if they still have it, but they used to carry it, and it was
okay,
inexpensive, like $15, and you had a
yeah,
little bit of everything.
yeah,
So
well,
yeah,
that's great.
I agree with you though. I'd like to search for that weird,
Yeah,
cool
yeah,
container, interesting
definitely.
stone.
So after everything is planted up, how do we care for it? So I think I might even be doing something wrong. So do we just spray the water, or can we pour the water in? What do we do?
Yeah. So when we get into like putting our layer of or putting our soil in there, I always like to add moisture to the soil already. And I like to do this when I'm repotting. In general, I'm going to add water to our dry soilless mixes and give it a good turn so that that water gets absorbed. And I want it to almost to the point where if I grab a big fist and squeeze it, just a couple drops come out, and that's nice and moist. The soil in this mix has some water bonded to it. If it's a cactus or a succulent thing, that's a whole other story. We're just going to kind of water them directly as needed. It's going to be open anyways.
Okay.
So we've started with some soil in there, but yeah, best to just basically pour in some water. Um, if you need to, again, just with individual plants. Again, as we get to the planting phase, they should be evenly moist or just
Okay.
moist enough to start already. But if we did have to add water, yeah, just pouring it in. My issue and my experience with the mist is, especially if you don't use something like a distilled water or something that's been, reverse osmosis kind of stuff, where there's nothing in the water, you get the little water spots on the inside of your glass
Ah,
when you mist,
yes.
right? And then the
Okay.
salts or if any fertilizer, because you need
Mm-hmm.
to feed it, get added in there. Then you have the added maintenance of now you're wiping and you
Yeah,
disturb the leaves or
that's a
you
good
break
point.
something. Yeah, so I like to just water it there with nice distilled water. And then just a light synthetic fertilizer is good as well. We don't want to over fertilize because
Okay.
that's going to stimulate all the plant growth, and we're in a smaller confined space. So
Okay.
if we have small plants to start with, like a baby's tear or a
Mm-hmm.
small, slower growing fern or something, that's okay. But if we have something like an arrowhead vine as one of our larger, it's got that kind of big shield-like leaf, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a vine. It's good for a taller plant, but it might explode and start to take
Okay.
over our space.
So do you think like a liquid fertilizer, like just like a 20-20-20, like you mix it in water and put it in?
Yeah,
Like I
yeah.
think of the Schultz, the dropper one.
Literally exactly what I was gonna say. I use my
Okay.
Schultz 10-15-10. I would use it at like a half strength type thing, and then I would just water them individually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
When we get to the closed terrarium, right, we're gonna have the heat. It's gonna be a little micro rainforest. We're going to see if we see that we have fog or water droplets on the inside of our glass. That means there's too much water sitting in the system. The humidity is really high, and we want to vent it a little bit. So we want to
Okay.
vent it so that we get a little bit of fog is okay, especially if we have it where a little bit of light touches it during the
Mm-hmm.
day. It's a bright indirect and a little beam kind of hits it for half an hour. That's okay. Or if it warms up, we get a little bit of fog, but we don't want droplets forming on the inside and streaking down. That's going to be a
Oh,
huge area for mildews and
oh,
botrytis and
okay.
things like that, gray
Okay.
molds and whatnot. Yeah. So if you do find that your terrarium gets dropped, just vent it. Do it for like a half day, close it, and see if it happens again. You may have to do it once or twice over a couple days just to make sure that you get it out of there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. And if something goes wrong, let's say some plants are done, like you can basically take everything out, wash it up, and like kind of start over, right? Like it's not the end of the world.
No, goodness, no.
Yeah.
This can change and grow and it's evolved. Like you were saying, you had like one of the little mini phalaenopsis in yours.
Yes.
It's out of bloom. Great. Maybe you have another one you want to pop out and
Up.
plunk in.
Yeah.
Exactly, for sure.
Okay.
So you can always trial and error. You can always prune things. You can take things out. You can replace them.
Mhm.
If you found that I thought it was going to be okay. It said it was slower growing, but it's loving this condition. It's growing a little
Yes.
faster. I don't want to really prune it. Pop it out and put someone else in there for
Okay.
sure. For
That's
sure.
good. And I do want to say too that when I talked about the variety and the interest, really paying attention to that, not just to fill it with things that all look the same. But you could also, if you want to do something like one really interesting plant, and then, sometimes people collect like on trips, they collect like driftwood or interesting pieces of bark that they find. Like you can also do that, right? Like you can also have, we mentioned like the fairy gardens and you mentioned the little train set, but I've also seen that like where it's been like one interesting plant and then just a couple of really interesting pieces of wood or something organic, right? You don't want to put like metal poles in there or something like that, but something more organic. So you again, the ideas are endless, and
Endless.
I'll post a few in our Facebook group. You can search on Pinterest or I'm sure just Google it, but I think it's something you can really have fun with. And I know Shane wrote in and asking about it, if this is a good project for kids, and we definitely think it is.
Oh
And
yeah.
what is he's saying? What is the difference between indoor plants and terrariums? So really, the terrarium is the container to hold those plants.
That's it.
Shane, yeah. So it's just a different medium. Instead of having it just a standalone plant in a pot, which is fine, that's a house plant, but you can buy miniature, especially if the container's not super big, miniature house plants, but you're taking them now out of the pot and making them into like their own little rainforest, their own little enclosed container. And it can be lidded or it can just be like a fishbowl where it's kind of almost enclosed, but just a little opening. And I always do these hand signs to you, right, man? It's as if the listeners can see us,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
as I describe the opening. So thank you, Shane, for always for listening and great questions. And this has been, oh my gosh, we weren't sure we would have enough to talk about during the show. We were warning Gary we might be finished early, but you guys love this topic. So I hope you do check out the stuff we post in our Facebook group. We really love to see you there. Yeah, in our last couple minutes, Matt, oh, this is a cool question. Darlene's question about the name terrarium. How did it come about? What does it mean?
Ooh, that's a good one, Darlene. You know what? I'd have to look that
Yeah.
up. I'm sure
Yeah.
it's terra meaning earth and arium or arium going to like a Greek or a Latin meaning like building or closure or vestibule
Because
type
like it's
thing.
aquarium, right? Like I think it's kind of that same idea, right? Aquarium is for fish and
Aqua
terrarium
being
is,
water
yeah.
and arium
Yeah.
or irium. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and Ron sent us a picture and he said this is mine. So it looks like a very cool, that is a very cool container.
Yeah.
He's showed us a picture of his terrarium. So that is great. So we're so glad you guys like this idea of this show. And we can't wait to see you send us pictures of the ones that you've created. Uh,
That's right. Don't
that's
forget you
right.
could share your pictures. We'd love to see them. At Down the Garden Path Podcast is our Facebook group. You can post pictures. We can help you troubleshoot with terrariums and your
Yes.
house
Yeah.
plants and your landscapes and stuff there. So we would love for you to join the group. It is a private group, just so we don't have lots of weird people coming in and out
Or
and
spam messages and
or
stuff.
spam messages. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
a nice private gardening community. You can join it. We'd love to see and have you share your pictures as well to all of our listeners.
Yeah. And Bob asked an interesting question we just have a minute for, but he says, can we grow a veggie plant in a terrarium bowl, etc.?
You know what? The first thing I think of, and the only really one that I would think of, is something like maybe a micro tomato if it was in a bigger one, because they're only going to grow like 8 to 10 inches tall and
Mm,
wide. So if you
yeah,
had it would still be a medium-sized terrarium.
right.
But even things like little beets or miniature carrots, like they get so much green on them, and they're
Yeah,
just so weeping and arching that you're going to get glass issues and other
yeah. So I think it'd
stuff.
be hard to do, Bob,
Yeah,
for sure, for
maybe Hank
sure.
can do it in his larger
Yes,
tank
for
tank
yeah, larger
terrarium.
tank, for sure, for sure. But that's good. But yeah, I think it's great for kids. I think it'd make a great gift. I think almost like our amaryllis, you can give somebody the gift and like all the pieces and have them put it together, right? I
Yeah.
think of like a senior at home who needs something to do, or you can do it for them and have them take care of it. So I think a lot of ways you can go there. And so we want to thank you guys. And do we want to talk a bit about YouTube that you can find? Now we know you can listen to us here live on Reality Radio 101, but you can download our podcast later in the week as well on your favorite podcast app. But now you can also listen to us on YouTube.
That's right. Maybe you don't listen to podcasts on your phone, but I think almost everybody watches videos or clips or TV on
On
YouTube. So we've moved there as well. So youtube.com/, Down the Garden Path podcast. All of the episodes like tonight's, once we publish it on our podcast providers, it'll automatically go there with all the show notes as well. And we're working on just making sure we migrate all of the past episodes up
Hmm.
there with all those show notes as well. So maybe if you're new listener or a long-time listener, and you haven't found all of them on your favorite podcast provider, or this is your main space, we have a new, very easy, everybody can use YouTube, just an easy
Hmm.
medium for you to interact, leave comments, likes, and shares through YouTube. So we'll be looking for you all there as well. And lots of views are already starting to slowly come in. We've only done it for a couple of weeks. So yeah, we hope to
Cool.
see you there as well. Well,
And Patreon.
yes, thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we also have Patreon, right? We had a couple of people asking how they might be able to support the podcast. We do try to keep it commercial free, but people like to support us and buy us kind of a coffee and say thank you or share their appreciation. So we do have our Patreon account. Again, our handle there is Down the Garden Path Podcast. So you can buy us a coffee. We also have another tiered reward where you can sign up and subscribe for $10. And every after our month in the garden at the end of the month, we'll do a live Zoom call and we can talk and you can see us and answer your questions and share stuff as well. So you can
Yeah,
interact with us behind the scenes.
that's right. Design questions or anything like that. So keep that in mind and check us out on Patreon.
That's right. Until next week, everyone, have a wonderful week. Thank you for listening to Down the Garden Path here on Reality Radio 101, and we'll see you next time.
Bye for
Bye-bye.
now.
Thank you for listening to Down the Garden Path with your host, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101.